The Crystal Tower restaurant had never looked so grand. Golden chandeliers dripped from the ceiling like frozen sunlight, their reflections dancing across walls of spotless glass. Every table was covered with crisp white linen, every wine glass polished until it shimmered like crystal flame. To most people, this night was just another exclusive event for the city's elite, but to me, it was chaos served on silver trays. I adjusted my apron, clutching the tray of champagne flutes, and took a deep breath before stepping into the private dining hall. Tonight's host was Edward Vance, the billionaire industrialist everyone in town admired or feared. He was tall, silver-haired, and moved with the kind of confidence only power could give. Rumor had it he'd just finalized a billion-dollar merger, and this celebration was his victory parade. Guests in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos crowded around him, laughing too loudly, clinking glasses too often. I weaved between them, silent and practiced, keeping my head down but my eyes open. That's the thing about being a waitress. People forget you exist. And when people forget you exist, they stop hiding their secrets. At the center of the main table, Vance stood before a velvet-covered display stand. Cameras flashed. He lifted the cover with a flourish, revealing a framed parchment sealed with red wax. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced proudly, "behold, the original trade charter of 1821, the foundation of our great company, priceless, irreplaceable." The crowd gasped, murmuring with admiration. Reporters scribbled notes, snapping photos like worshippers at a shrine. But as I poured champagne into Vance's glass, my gaze fell on the document's lower corner. The wax seal, it was too perfect. A flawless circle with sharp edges and no sign of pressure marks. I remembered my father, an antique restorer, explaining that old wax seals were hand-stamped, rough, uneven, alive with the flaws of history. This one looked printed, manufactured. My pulse quickened. I glanced again. The parchment's edges were clean, too clean. No yellowing, no fragile texture. "Priceless," he repeated, smiling for the cameras. But I knew the truth. It wasn't priceless. It was freshly made, and I was the only one in the room who could see it. The night grew heavier as the clock struck 11. The guests were tipsy now, laughter echoing off the marble walls. The air thick with perfume and expensive lies. I kept refilling glasses, smiling politely, pretending to be invisible. But my mind wasn't on the guests anymore. It was on the parchment resting inside that glass case, glowing faintly under the spotlight like a crown jewel. From across the room, I saw Edward Vance talking to a man in a grey suit who didn't quite fit in. He wasn't drinking, wasn't mingling. He just stood near the edge of the crowd, glancing around nervously. The kind of man who wanted to be unseen, the kind of man who had secrets. When I came closer to serve another round, I noticed something strange. As the music swelled, Vance stretched out his hand as if to shake the man's, but instead, the man slid a small brown envelope into Vance's palm. Quick, discreet, but not quick enough to escape my eyes. I caught the reflection in the polished tray I was holding. Vance tucked the envelope into his inner jacket pocket and leaned forward. His voice dropped to a whisper, but I was near enough to catch a few words. "Make sure the original's gone before sunrise," he said sharply. The man nodded once and disappeared into the hallway. My hands froze around the tray. The original? Gone? Did that mean the real trade charter was somewhere or already destroyed? Vance turned, suddenly scanning the room. I lowered my head quickly, pretending to arrange empty glasses. His gaze passed over me without suspicion, and I exhaled quietly. My instincts screamed to walk away, forget it all, and finish my shift. But curiosity, or maybe conscience, rooted me to the floor. As I passed the table again, I slipped my hand into my apron and pressed the small, disposable camera I always carried. Just one click. The soft shutter sound was swallowed by the music. I now had a picture of the seal. Proof. Faint but real. I smiled faintly to myself as I served another guest. They thought I was invisible, and that was their first mistake. The next morning, sunlight crept through the blinds of my tiny apartment, painting the walls with pale gold. I hadn't slept all night. The image of that fake seal burned behind my eyelids every time I closed them. I knew what I saw, But what could a waitress possibly do against a billionaire? With lawyers and private security? Still, curiosity gnawed at me. I pulled out the old phone number I'd kept tucked in my father's book. Dr. Ravi Patel, a historian and document examiner who had once helped restore the City Museum's archives. He had worked with my father before, back when history still felt honest. I called him. "Dr. Patel? It's Lena. I think I found a forgery." 2 hours later, I stood in his dusty office surrounded by shelves stacked with parchment, ink bottles and history itself. I showed him the photo I'd taken, the seal, the signature, the parchment edges. He adjusted his glasses, frowning deeply. "This ink," he murmured, "is synthetic. The pigment wasn't even invented until 2010. This parchment looks machine-pressed, modern. Whoever made this knew what they were doing, but not enough." "So it's fake?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He nodded. "Definitely. And if Vance is displaying this as real, he's not just lying, he's committing fraud." I walked out of his office with my heart pounding. I wasn't just a witness anymore. I was holding evidence of a billionaire's crime. That evening, the restaurant buzzed again. Edward Vance had returned, this time for a private dinner with a government trade inspector, probably to finalize the merger his historic document had helped justify. I slipped back into my black uniform, pretending it was just another night. As I placed his drink on the table, my hands didn't shake. "You might want to make sure the real charter is where you think it is," I said quietly, just loud enough for the inspector to hear. Vance froze, his confident smile faltering for the first time. "What did you just say?" he hissed. Before I could answer, the inspector turned toward him, suspicion clouding his face. "Yes, Mr. Vance," he said. "Why don't you tell us?" The trap was set. The next morning, the world knew. Every major news channel flashed the same headline across their screens. "Billionaire Edward Vance exposed. Historic document proven fake." I stood in my small apartment kitchen, still wearing my work shoes, staring at the TV in disbelief. The image of the glass case filled the screen, only now the seal had been circled in red, the same way I'd photographed it. News anchors called it one of the boldest acts of corporate deception in recent history. Apparently, after I whispered to the inspector, he had quietly postponed signing the merger and ordered an immediate verification. When the lab results came back, it was undeniable. The ink was modern, the parchment synthetic. The Priceless charter had been forged, and the original had vanished months ago. By noon, Vance's office was swarming with investigators. His assistant had been detained, and that man in the grey suit, the one who'd slipped him the envelope, was arrested at the airport trying to leave the country. I watched the chaos unfold with mixed feelings, a strange blend of satisfaction, fear, and sadness. I hadn't meant to start a scandal. I only wanted the truth to be seen. But once truth starts burning, it doesn't stop until everything false turns to ash. The restaurant manager called me later that day. He sounded nervous. "Lena, the reporters are asking about you. The inspector mentioned your name." "Tell them I don't work there anymore," I said simply. And I didn't. I took off my apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the counter for the last time. A week later, an article in the Chronicle called me the waitress who caught a billionaire. My photo was printed next to the words, though I barely recognized myself. Calm, composed, holding a tray like it was a badge of honor. People kept asking me how I noticed, how someone like me could see what no one else did. I always gave the same answer, with a small, knowing smile. I was just a waitress. But history was my side job. And in that moment I knew I hadn't just served tables. I'd served the truth.